Petrovsky spent the whole next week in bed, with a terrible nervous breakdown, sometimes shaking uncontrollably, sometimes falling into a hot, deep, sweaty nothingness, other times cursing himself for being faint-hearted, confronted by even a modest evil, and yet again trying to rationalize himself as being responsible for his and Beata's well-being, and their quest to reach the promised land instead of a gulag outlet. It wasn't 1937, it was just 1973, so he definitely should have been braver. In a few weeks, right after they walked out of the side door of the KZB headquarters, Petrovsky carefully examined the exit visa stamped into his new passport, while Beata stared at hers. Some people from the long line to enter that door to apply for emigration cheered and exchanged high fives with them. The next step was to apply for immigration at the American consulate. Petrovsky and Beata were prepared, having heard the story from Drug, who applied just a few days earlier and, as their oldest and, not to avoid tautology, best friend, shared any and all minuscule detail. Part of that story also explained how his name morphed into Drug. Usually, it is very easy to explain somebody's name, but not in this case. His last name back then was Dragolubov. In the Zagorian language, it came from the meaning of drag as dorogoy, or dear, and Lyubov as love. So his quite sugary name innocently meant dear beloved. Yet it was in the early 70s when the students learned English not so much from intelligent, earnest, and equally clueless teachers, as from the jackets of the smuggled LPs. Rolling Stone magazines read so many times that there were holes in the crumpled pages, and it was still nothing compared to hell knows what the Playboy magazines were subjected to. It took no time for the guy's name to become Drugolubov, drug lover, which eventually proved to be not so much a funny name as a self-fulfilled prophecy. Petrovsky just called him Drug, which was extra fun when surrounded by grown-ups having no idea it's not just a shortened last name. Yet this was not the end of his name's evolution. Drag was ahead of Petrovsky and Beata to show up at the American consulate, stand there overnight in a line substantially longer than the one to Lenin's tomb, and shove his uncut hair and unshaven yet visibly freckled face into a small opening looking at a neatly crew-cut American clerk. One of the clerk's tasks was to transliterate the first and last names into English. It seemed their subtask was to never do it quite right, and leave the immigrants with slightly incorrectly spelled names. One would be forever curious if it had any reasonable purpose besides making immigrants spell their names countless times over the phone for the rest of their lives. Alexanders became Alexanders, Michaels became Mikhails, Oscars became Oscars with a K in the middle, Edwards became Edwards, and so on. Well, the last names usually were treated in a more straightforward way. Drag and Drug are spelled the same in Zagorian. However, the bright redhead afro surrounding a hippie face in the opening and the name Drugolubov made just way too much harmony for the clerk's taste. He suggested Dragolubov, but another connotation didn't escape both, and after a short brainstorming session, they settled on Drugolubov. Drug means friend in Zagorian, means nothing in English, yet is not entirely meaningless, as it might remind you of some of the characters from The Clockwork Orange. Back from the embassy, Drug announced that now, as he quit drugs, he'll have to learn doing drugs. And who would like to quit drugs, or, in another word, friends? Petrovsky laughed and immediately liked the new name, as it was easy for him to call his friend a Drug. Same difference. Widlovsky wasn't Widlovsky back then, but was Mikhail Petrovsky. But once he raised roaring laughter of the whole English classroom when he tried to pronounce "with love" by painful contortions of his lips, tongue, and his whole face, but couldn't produce anything better than "we'd laugh." Pronouncing the gave him creeps and came out as "duh," despite him trying as much as he can. Well, wasn't that good enough for the times when the Beatles were often pronounced in Zagoria as Tihi, bless you, Beatles? Hence all his friends started calling him Widlovsky, and then he started to like the name himself. Drug's story about the name change gave Petrovsky an idea. Talking to a clerk in the American consulate, Widlowski was able to persuade her to change Petrovsky into Widlowski, explaining that V and W, E and I, D and T, close enough, and finally R and L, outright lie, have indeed the same pronunciation in Zagorian. So the closest analog to a Zagorian Petrovsky would be Widlowski in English. He wasn't sure the clerk believed it when she chuckled and made that change. A few days later, they arrived at the Grashk train station. Throngs of emigrants carrying luggage surged down the station, Widlowski and Beata among them. They headed toward a platform and stopped at the passport controls and customs.
Papers, please.
Kharitonov, I didn't realize. I thought you'd be in a corner office at the KGB headquarters.
Please wait.
Kharitonov, how did...
Haritonov pointed a finger at Widlowski without looking up, silencing him. Then, after a moment, he raised his head.
Looks like you're free to go.
Widlowski, surprised, stepped past Haritonov onto the platform, carrying his luggage. But as Beata stepped forward to follow, Haritonov moved between them.
But she isn't.
I don't understand.
Her papers are out of order. Afraid she won't be able to join you.
Widlowski moved to step back to Beata, past Haritonov, but Haritonov raised his hand.
I'm sorry, you're cleared. The motherland bids you a safe journey.
This is madness. Haritonov.
Widlowski pushed past him, forcefully this time, but Haritonov shoved him back. Widlowski stumbled to the ground.
Assaulting a KGB officer? Men have vanished into jail cells for less. You better hurry.
I'm not living without her.
Well, she's not cleared to leave. Not until...
Haritonov pulled out his official government ledger, pen, and stamp. He thought for a minute and then smiled to himself, pleased.
Not until the Beatles reunite. Then she can leave the country.
Look, please. This is serious.
I know. All official state business is serious.
He loudly pressed the stamp over his signature, then held up the ledger and quickly showed it to Widlowski.
See? Right there. When the Beatles reunite, so can you.
Widlowski looked over his shoulder at the train, then back at Beata, hesitating. She mouthed the word.
Go.
No!
She mouthed it again. He stepped forward, toward Haritonov, who dropped his hand to his holster. Widlowski stepped back. Shaking, Widlowski began to go back down the platform, toward the train. The engine of the train lumbered to life as Widlowski climbed aboard.
Widlowski! I'll see you at the reunion!
She mustered up a weak smile as the train pulled away from the station. He just stared back. The train slowly rolled over a large bridge where Widlowski imagined a Mississippi River-type steamboat floating by with an all-star band headed by Ringo Starr, singing Are You Ready?